never intended to go, in circumstances that they never dreamed would happen. Why? It's because sin will always take you further than you wanted to go, and it'll keep you longer than you wanted to stay. The last thing is that sin always costs you more than you were willing to pay. A few verses down, verse 30, and this is after Samson eyes had been gouged out, and he was chained to some sort of a grindstone, and this would have been normally something that they would have set a donkey to do or something, but the Philistines thought this would be an appropriate thing for the mightiest man in all of Israel to be doing for the rest of his life. And I'm sure that Samson never thought it would end this way, and he really lost some precious things as payment for his sin. Think about it. His eyes were gouged out. So never again would he be able to see a sunset or a beautiful woman, or to lay eyes on his mother or his father. He would never see his own face or the face of those who kept him bound. He had lost God's approval and spirit and blessing. This was probably no real surprise, but it had to be painful. I think he would always be thinking about what he could have been. He wouldn't be able to fulfill God's plan in his life. The security of the nation of Israel, he was supposed to be the beginning of their deliverance. Well, now that was all in turmoil. But sin always takes more than its fair share. The devil doesn't want just part of you. He wants all of you. The decision is simple. No one would ever choose to put themselves in the hands of a murderer or a liar rather than the hands of God, but we don't always realize the cost. And sin is very costly. If it weren't, then Christ would not have died on the cross to pay for our sins. He showed us the cost, and the price has been paid so that we'd never have to. There was a cow, and I related to this story of this cow. I had something in common with this cow. And no, it's not my size. This cow was in Greenwood, Maine. And she had jumped over a fence. When she jumped over the fence, she stumbled and fell down on her head. She kind of did a header. Her horns ran under the roots of a tree, and her head got stuck. Her nose was submerged in a small pool of water only about 1 inch or 2 deep, but she was held down there, and she drowned. I can't imagine anybody ever walking by a puddle and going, "Ooh, I have to be very careful right here." I told you I could relate to this cow. I got my tractor stuck in the mud really deep a few years ago, and I had to kind of wait till it was we'd been through a cold stretch like we'd just been through, and so I had to wait for the weather to kind of clear and ice to melt and all this stuff. And by the time I got there, the front end of the tractor, it just has that one wheel in the front, and it was buried all the way. And I got my handyman jack, and I was trying to jack the front end of that tractor up, and I was having a hard time getting enough pressure on there, so I went to find a piece of pipe. The only pipe I could find had a curve in it. It was an old piece of a trampoline that my kids had at one time. And so I got on that, and I had that pipe, and I was pulling on that handyman jack, and I got it to a certain point, and it flipped on me because of that curve. When it flipped on me, it hit me right square in the face. And I backed up a little bit, and the lights just started going out. And all I could think is, I'm going to fall down, because there was still just probably about this much water that was all around. I thought, I'm going to fall down face first in this water. My wife isn't even going to know I'm down here for probably 3 hours. And when she gets here, I'm going to be drowned in this little stupid puddle of water. So it's amazing when you get clocked like that, and you're trying to make yourself fall in the right direction, but you can't see the ground anymore. But we don't live thinking that. Boy, I should be really careful, because if I fall down in this puddle, I could drown. We often think that as long as our sins are small, we're okay. But it's not true, because the cost of sin, big or small, is more than you'll ever want to pay. Here in verse 30, after Samson's been grinding away, he asks God, he says, God, give me one more. They were having a big festival to one of their gods, and they brought Samson in. They unshackled him and brought him into this big hall where everybody was, and they were just there to laugh at him, this big mighty man who was so strong and was going to save Israel. And Samson asked God for one more burst of strength. Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. So they brought Samson in, and it says they put him between two pillars in this huge building, and they were like probably the most important ones. And he asked God, he said, just help me to do this one more time. And so it's kind of impressive the way that he finished. But that's not the way it was supposed to be. I think if he had walked according to God's plan, he would have had a much better life. What does the life of Samson teach us? One is that God is always faithful. Although his life was full of compromise and sin, God was willing to meet him right there at the end and give him one more chance. And what did it take on his part? Just had to recognize who God really was. Samson, his tragedy started with some simple, seemingly harmless compromise, but it ended up costing him his life. We can find examples of people all the time that their lives could have amounted to something, but we see that they really didn't. The challenge for you and I today is not to see how much you can do and still be known as a Christian or still be known as a good guy. The challenge is to let God help you overcome your weaknesses and be mightily used by Him. I want you to know tonight that wherever you are, it's not too late to start over, to be the man or woman that God's calling you to be. There was a book written by a guy named Richard Heffler. It's called Will Daylight Come? And he tells this little story. A little boy visiting his grandparents was given his first slingshot. He practiced in the woods, but he could never hit his mark. He made the mistake that we all do. If you can't hit if you're a bad shot, just aim at something really valuable and you'll hit it. He came back to his grandma's yard and he spied her pet duck. He took aim and let fly, and the stone hit and the duck fell dead. The boy panicked desperately. He hid the duck in the woodpile only to look up and see his sister watching. Sally had seen it all, but she said nothing. After lunch that day, Grandma said, "Sally, let's wash the dishes." Sally said, "Oh, Johnny told me he wanted to help in the kitchen today. Didn't you, Johnny?" She whispered to him, "Remember the duck." So Johnny did the dishes. Later, Grandpa asked the children if the children wanted to go fishing. "I'm sorry," Grandma said, "but I need Sally to help me make supper." Sally smiled again and said, "That's all taken care of."